In New Mexico, there's an epidemic all in itself, human sex trafficking, which is often overlooked.
There is a demand in our state and across the United States for sex with kids. Like, this is a problem. This is the kind of crime that can happen to your daughter, to your son. This absolutely can. When you look at our state, our hotspots are right on the border. So right there by Las Cruces, El Paso, and the Mexico border. We have a hotspot right there on our eastern border that we share with Texas around that big oil field that's there. What we've seen is labor camps, basically, or man camps raising up there, and then sex trafficking is increasing there. And then we see sex trafficking on the Navajo Nation. So then if we go up to that northwest corner of New Mexico, also Albuquerque as our population center, we're naturally going to have more trafficking because we just have more people. But we are also generally the top venue in the state for large events. So things like the Gathering of Nations, International Balloon Fiesta, the State Fair, all of those are large population events. And so those are events where there's going to be an increase in trafficking as well.
Every single truck stop in the country is a trafficking hotbed. Why? It's transient. Pimps go there. They know they can pick up a customer. They know if they pick up a customer, this customer is just rolling through. They're going to get the girl in that truck. The customer will roll through 15, 20 miles down the road. They'll meet up again. This is in Albuquerque, in the neighborhoods of Albuquerque. The familiar trafficking, it is in the affluent neighborhoods. It is in the private schools and the public schools. It's in the church community. Okay, that's where it's hidden in plain sight, and that's where the crime is growing the fastest.
New Mexico has had very little legislation around the crime of sex trafficking. A recent New Mexico bill, House Bill 56, improves the lives of human trafficking victims and increases the penalties for traffickers.
Right now, our state kind of, if you're only just convicted of trafficking, it's a 3-year sentence. And I'm sorry, that is not enough time for the selling of a human.
Victims every year make so much money for these traffickers. And the victims don't see any of that, the money they earned. So with this House bill, it's going to help victims get that money back. The victims are forced to participate, like in shoplifting, stealing cars. So with that bill, it's going to help the victims not be accountable for the crimes that they were forced to participate in.
There are really good laws, but a law means nothing unless it's enforced. There are as many people for the sexual exploitation of children in this country as there are people against it. There's a lot of people that want to normalize pedophilia, that want to give pedophiles rights. There's a lot of people in legislature in DC, in the House and the Senate, in State House and Senate, that are writing laws to protect the predator.
Who can be the predators and who are the victims?
Who's buying children? Everybody. And I mean everybody, not every human being, but every sector of society. It's the pastor, the police chief, the sitting U.S. senator, the janitor, the guy next door, the school principal. It's every job description has been arrested on this.
There are a lot of male traffickers. However, there are a lot of female traffickers. Trafficking doesn't just happen to girls and women. It absolutely does happen to boys. It absolutely does happen to men. And one population that is really vulnerable to trafficking is the LGBTQ community.
The sexual exploitation of human beings doesn't profile. It doesn't ask you your gender, your race, your class, your socioeconomic status, your skin color. It is a sick individual that needs serious help trying to satisfy a sexual need by abusing another person.
Before the, real advent of social media, traffickers would find their victims at malls, at the park, any place where young people would hang out. There was a whole different way that they would do that. But because social media has pretty much opened the front door to all of our lives, that is an easy door for those traffickers to be able to walk through. We need to understand that predators are absolutely out there, and they are looking for people who are vulnerable and will respond to that. Pornography is the driving force for demand in the United States today. There are direct tie-ins between the use of pornography and the choice to purchase a person.
There's not a single pedophile we've ever apprehended, ever interviewed, that was not a porn addict. All of them will tell you it started with porn and abuse.
We have seen human trafficking victims that are absolutely used in pornography. We have seen pornography used to train young human trafficking victims on this is what you have to do. And so this is how they're absolutely trained. And then we have seen how pornography contributes to this demand.
There are 3 agencies in New Mexico that provide services: New Mexico Dream Center, the Life Link in Santa Fe, and First Nations. Helping a victim takes time and many resources. The services in New Mexico are limited.
Rescuing a child is important, of course. We don't want any child to be in the hands of a perpetrator or a predator. But once you rescue that child, the amount of work that then goes into restoring that life, that child doesn't go home. That child doesn't just get to go back to school and catch up for the 2 or 3 grades they've missed. That child needs serious, what's called trauma-informed therapy. And that's incredibly important work, but very difficult to come by. So providing services to the victims, the survivors, victim services, is huge. And we've got a massive shortage in our country for those resources.
We do not have services for minor victims of trafficking, so for the young people. And so if we don't have services for children around trafficking, then we're not ever going to be able to get ahead of this problem. We were recently awarded some federal funding to start a group home for minors who've been trafficked. So we're in the process right now of doing that. We also are working with the New Mexico Attorney General's office in developing a statewide plan to improve outcomes for minor victims of trafficking. We had at one point 3 clients who had all been trafficked as homeless teens from East Central, all basically like Wyoming and Central area. And so we really felt like we needed to do something to kind of maybe do some preventive measures to help that from happening.
We've got 1,250 licensed, dedicated anti-trafficking restorative care beds in our country. 1,250, okay? It's nothing. The hotel down the street probably has 500 rooms. So there's 1,250 beds in the nation. Of the 1,250, 300 are for minors. So people say, okay, Yaku, how many children are at risk per day in the United States for being trafficked? So let me give you some numbers. Texas, 75,000. So I'm telling you, there's 300 beds in the nation, right? That's licensed. There's 75,000 being trafficked in Texas, 500,000, 1% of the crimes reported. When people say rescue the children, I go, that's fantastic. But even the police, law enforcement, the NGOs like us will tell you, yeah, you can rescue that child, but where does that child go?
The way that clients come to us is a variety of ways. We work very closely with law enforcement. So we do get referrals from law enforcement when they have done some sort of a sting or something's been called into them. So that absolutely happens. But we also get referrals from hospitals and other social service agencies, from homeless shelters, all of these different places where a victim could perhaps be.
Non-government organizations as ourselves have to work with law enforcement, with a district attorney, with a judge who issues the warrant, hopefully in time, to go and use the intel that was driven by the NGOs to law enforcement. The regular officer, one, doesn't have the training, and I'm not being disparaging them. There's no time in the police academy to train them. There's no resource to train them. There's no funding to train them. Plus, you're asking a regular police officer to do all his work, everything he's got to do. Now, all of a sudden, he's got to be a sex trafficking expert. You need special task forces within police departments where select individuals get extra training and gets the funding to focus solely on trafficking cases.
According to Shelley Rep, a startling report from the New Mexico's Attorney General's office showed that there was 2,000 requests for investigation of child sex trafficking in 2020.
When we look back at 2020, we saw 35 new law enforcement cases against traffickers, and so we saw those 35 new cases. Our service provider report, where we looked at what the service providers did, because our clients don't have to work with law enforcement if they don't want to. But we had 250, not just us, but the three agencies combined, had over 250 new human trafficking victims in 2020. Kids are being screened more regularly, but because we don't have in-state services, they are sent out of state. So there are services in Colorado that they could be sent, in Utah, in Arizona, in California. We've had kids sent as far away as Arkansas.
Another staggering reality is the trafficking of Indigenous women.
There is a big movement around missing and murdered Indigenous women. We are involved, part of our task force is one that does assist with the native lands. The different pueblos and reservations, these native lands are, they are their own nation. Because of that, their response to any sort of crime, but their response to these types of human crimes is going to vary greatly.
The cases we see is like with Native American victims, a lot of the women or men or the LGBTQ community, they come from the reservation and then they come into urban areas, looking for better employment, better life. But there are times where they get mixed up in the wrong crowd and they're given false promises.
The reservation is a remote area, so it's very easy for someone to become a victim, a murder victim, because the lack of resource, the lack of communication, the lack of jurisdiction. Navajo Nation is in 2 states, Arizona, New Mexico. We have Gallup, New Mexico, that's a border town. You have I-40, I-25. It's an easy target. These traffickers are smart people. We're very an easy prey population, vulnerable people. There's a lot of trauma, on the reservation.
According to Booyans, our nation ranks #1 in exploiting children and commercializing sex with children.
But we have a huge border crisis, right? And it's not the border crisis politicians necessarily want to talk about, just immigration and illegal immigration. Our largest border crisis is children. Gangs like MS-13, every single drug cartel is trafficking children. Every single one of them, because I understand it's more lucrative to traffic children. Every single one of them have what we call mules and coyotes, people that bring the children across, because you have Mexican families that saying, look, there's no life for my child here. They pay a mule $50 to just smuggle their kid across the border. What that mother and father don't know is that child is going to be raped. That child is going to be exploited, because that child is a money maker for the cartels.
If you're wanting to help in the fight against trafficking, you can do advocacy work and volunteer service.
And all it takes is just, knowing the warning signs, what to look for, call the 1505 Get Free, and you could potentially, save someone's life out there. Also for medical and behavioral health staff out there, it's important. We're medical based, and they say that 88% of human trafficking victims come through the healthcare system, 88%. So it just takes that nurse or that doctor to know those warning signs to, potentially save someone's life.
The more that our community and our society is aware of this crime, the more likely they are to recognize it. We do a lot of trainings. We do trainings for professionals, and we do trainings for general audience as well around identification, and then how would you report something like that? So you see somebody who you think is a victim, what would be the next steps? If you feel passionate about this subject, there is something happening in your community that you can get behind and get involved.
For News 3 New Mexico, I'm Marilyn Upchurch.